Now, I was going to ask you because you were mentioning this aspect of like a DeFi, and then you were saying on chain. Can you explain like those two different things? Because I was trying to follow through as to like the actual
Sure.
concepts themselves.
So DeFi is just decentralized finance, and
Okay.
it's probably good that we define that term early in the conversation. Finance, as we know it, is centralized finance. Right? We all have bank accounts. We all have, a Chase bank account or Wells Fargo or Bank of America. We all have places where we can get loans. We have credit cards. We have insurance companies.
Hmm.
All the traditional financial world, that's centralized finance. DeFi is taking that archaic system, all the red tape and people and infrastructure and costs that exist today to do a simple transaction and bringing it into the Ethereum or other
Yeah.
platforms. Most of it right now exists within the Ethereum ecosystem. So things like banks, which are really lenders, they take your deposits, right? They take your checking and savings account, they take your money, they find someone who wants to buy a car, they'll lend them the money. The person will pay the bank 6%, and the bank will pay you 0.01% in your
Mm.
savings and keep the difference, right? That's what centralized banks do. They'll take your money, they'll lend it to someone who wants to use it for a credit card, take your money, lend it to someone who wants to buy a house, start a business, etc. That's all traditional finance. DeFi is a way to disintermediate these banks, essentially. That's one of the biggest use cases. So instead of having a bank sit in the middle between me and my money and you as a borrower, we can all interact into this DeFi ecosystem. You don't need a bank account. You don't need a username. You don't need a login. You don't need to be in the US. You don't need to be in China. You can be anywhere in the world as long as you have an internet connection and an Ethereum address, an Ethereum wallet. You can interact. I can lend you money. You can pay me interest. I can sell you insurance. I could. We can have a savings account. You can pretty much do anything that exists. Slowly over time, we're building more and more into DeFi. What we do at our fund is we invest in these protocols, into these projects that are trying to capture more of the centralized world. And the centralized world is broken, right? We see what's happening, right? The bankers are getting rich, the stockholders are getting rich, the executives are getting rich, but the people who are actually providing the money into this, the liquidity providers, we're getting paid 0.01, if that. There's some bank accounts in the world in Europe that are paying negative interest rate, which means you literally, by depositing your money, they charge you to hold on to your money. When you account in the United States for overdraft fees and ATM fees and all the fees on top of fees on top of fees, and then you deduct that from whatever interest you were getting, you're actually in the negative interest rate right now. So these bankers are getting rich. The users, the people are suffering. Decentralized finance is trying to solve and get rid of some of these rent seekers in the ecosystem. What we do is we try to identify those entrepreneurs that are building, and we invest in them, and we try to help our investors capture as much of that value as possible.
Now, the um, for those who don't understand how there's so when someone is told like how Bank America works, they understand because there's people involved to keep the system going. How do you explain to those who don't understand how this checks and balance system works in a system that is technically decentralized, so there is there's
Yeah,
no entity keeping it
that's a
managed?
great question. That's a great question. So there's significant cost at something like Bank of America. There's think of all the people, think of all the real estate, think of all the ATMs and the offices and the electricity and the cars moving the cash around. All that has to be borne by the users, right? But yeah, it does provide checks and balances. What these DeFi protocols have done and have done really well is a concept that we like to call code is law. So all of these interactions, all of these rules have been written into code and enshrined into the public domain. So they're written into a series of code, and they're open source, and they're put onto the Ethereum platform. And they're saying, if you want to interact with my decentralized bank, here's a list of the rules. Here's how things will operate. I, as a user, cannot change those, and you, as an entrepreneur, cannot change them either. They are enshrined forever. The rules are set, they cannot be changed. In our current system, the rules can change at the whims of regulators, at the whims of bankers, at the whims of the people, new administration, Congress, etc. So to answer your question is the system of checks and balances and rules exists. It's codified. It's voted on. It's put into the public domain. No one can change it. And anyone who wants to interact with this system has to abide by those rules. And if you don't like this system, there's 3 or 4 other entrepreneurs that are building other cooler systems that are going to try to eat that one's
Now,
lunch.
are